from an early age, I had a very strong work ethic and I was too lazy to be poor. And I was like, I always wanted to have a lot of money. And then I worked at Facebook and I made a lot of money. I walked away from Facebook. I didn't walk toward anything. And that's one of the lessons that I would encourage your listeners to think about. If you're leaving something, what are you going toward? Because you should always have a destination in mind as opposed to just not that kind of thing.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, where I bring the best and the brightest in the world of business, marketing, entrepreneurship, and career growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Folks, my guest today on the podcast is Paul Ollinger. After 15 years in sales at companies like Yahoo, Facebook, Paul bailed on the corporate world to chase the comedy dream that has seen him headline top clubs like Caroline's on Broadway, West Side Comedy Club in New York, Cobb's in San Fran, Zanies in Nashville, and a ton more. And he's performed at the Hollywood Improv, Comedy Cellar, and shared the stage with many comedians, like one of my favorites, Norm Macdonald, Dave Attell, and Chelsea Handler. And Paul has opened up for major musical acts, including Styx and Collective Soul. How is that? We'll get to that in a little bit. And we're going to dig into his background, including his amazing podcast, the Crazy Money Podcast, in which he's explored the connection between money, happiness, and work, a lot of the stuff that we do here. And he's had some big-time guests, Judd Apatow, LL Cool J, Moby, and Nobel Prize winners. I've had a couple of these really interesting folks on. Paul, how do you get these folks to stop rambling? What's your stop rambling technique? Because a lot of these folks, they all love to talk about themselves.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on.
Welcome.
My technique for stopping rambling is to interrupt them. If
polite
somebody's
interruption?
rambling, you need to give them the opportunity to stop talking. And the best way to do that is, what you said was really interesting. Tell me, redirect with some kind of question like that.
You know, the master of the interruption is Howard Stern. Everyone knows who listens to this show. Howard's my broadcasting, interviewing idol, because he turns every interview into a conversation. But I love, and I listen very astutely, like he'll interrupt a Mick Jagger, a Keith Richards, a Hillary Clinton, and he does it. I mean, he has permission to do that.
He's earned that permission, yeah, and he's one of the masters of the genre.
Well, Paul, welcome to the show. We were talking a little bit offline, and I get a decent amount of outreach at this point from PR agencies and other folks wanting to do the show. And for me, it has to be interesting, because if I'm not interested, at least when I read the bio and the background, the pitch, I'm not going to be interested when we have this conversation. And your background absolutely fascinates me. I love comedy. I love tech world. Bring the two together, and we're going to unpack your story here. So I want to hit the rewind button, and not so much this is your life, Paul Ollinger, but more so, I'm always curious where folks started and got their roots. If you don't mind me asking, what did your parents do for a living?
My father was a nuclear physicist. My mother was a worker at our church. She taught adult religious education.
Wow. So let's start with the dad side, nuclear physicist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to put a
yes, I'm a genius.
Timeline.
I think that's your next question.
I'm going to put the timeline here, but like I'm sure your dad came home with some pretty interesting stories, or was it completely boring type of work that he did?
My dad's work was, it was interesting during the time, because if you recall, 3 Mile Island, the nuclear plant, had a meltdown.
Mm-hmm.
It was near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or something like that. And, that was in 1978, I want to say. And so nuclear energy was on a lot of people's mind when I was a kid. And so the fact that my dad was a nuclear physicist, plus, it just sounds like, oh, your dad's some kind of genius. And he was a very, very intelligent man. So people were always interested to find out what he did. But what he really did was he worked for Georgia Power in Atlanta, where we lived. And he did a lot of environmental testing around the nuclear plants to see, what's going on around the around the plants, to see if there were, radiation levels that were acceptable in the soil and the water and in the air, things like that. And so he worked with local officials and the people that worked at the plant to, kind of gauge the safety of those operations.
Interesting. Did he have like a Geiger counter around his neck?
No, maybe he should have. But
wait, Geiger
he had
for
6
earthquakes?
kids, so he wasn't sterile.
And you don't have 3 eyes over here. So
I don't have 3 eyes. My kids have 2 eyes. I've got 2 kids. So apparently it didn't have a negative effect, at least along those lines. Maybe it made both of our hair fall out, but I don't know.
Were your parents, were they humorous? Were they funny? Was it in the blood? Did you have a funny household?
My dad was like a dad joke kind of guy,
Nah.
and I'm one of 6 kids. Well, I think I just said that. I'm one of 6 kids, and so, the family dinner table was, just chaotic, and people trying to top each other with, the most funny observations, jokes, or cut down of your siblings.
Oh yeah.
Mostly in love, not all.
Yeah, that's sibling, but that's a sibling, the rivalry, that's the jesting, the poking.
Yeah. And my mom had more of a biting sense of humor. That was, and she was also a very charismatic person. So yeah, there was some degree of jocularity in the air.
So going back to that time, do you recall your first, comedic influencers? Like who influenced you?
It's you hate to even say this, but it was like Bill Cosby. And
We could park it because let's park the most recent Bill Cosby. Talk
yeah.
about the roots of Bill Cosby, brilliant comedian.
Yeah, I mean his observational stories that would, go on for 10 or 15
Mm.
minutes, and then his shows were 90 minutes or 2 hours long of him just talking and telling stories. He was a comedic genius. I suppose he still is, although, we know what we know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I remember listening, Fat Albert was on the
Hey, hey,
cartoons
hey.
Saturday mornings, and
I'm not
then
that young. I
the
remember.
Cosby Show in the 80s was as big a show as there was. And so Cosby was huge. I'll also say that I remember, and I was talking to my good friend Tom Lacey. The Lacey twins were in my class at St. Jude's Elementary, St. Jude the Apostle Catholic School in Atlanta. And one time I remember I was snooping around my dad's chest of drawers or whatever it was, and I found an album in his sock drawer
Hmm.
or his underwear drawer or something, and it was George Carlin's
Oh.
album. And apparently my oldest sister, who's probably 7 or 8 years older than me, had told my parents to buy that record. And then when my aunt and uncle came over and all their kids, they put it on the turntable for everyone to hear. And it was on for about 2 minutes before
Yeah.
they yanked it off, and my dad stowed it away in his sock drawer, never to be unearthed again. But I unearthed it, and I remember taking it over to the Lacey boys' house, and we'd sit there listening to George Carlin, and we would end up, doing mock
Yep.
routines of George Carlin's routine.
Let's talk about George Carlin for a moment here. So
Yeah.
George Carlin is my core comedic influence, and it started in summer camp. I was probably 11, 12
Jewish?
years old.
Did you go to Jewish summer
Of
camp?
course I did. And I had the cassette.
I wish
tape.
I've got a little bit of Jewish blood in me. I
Everyone does.
think I missed out on this core experience of going to sleepaway
And
camp where they're trying to get you to procreate with your female
that's a whole
campers.
go of it. But it was Class Clown. It was the album Class Clown, right? That was the title of it, I believe. And I would just have it in my cassette recorder, my little Walkman. And at night after lights out, I would just listen to it and I'd laugh at it with my friends. And fast forward to today, full circle moment. About 2 years ago, I had Kevin Smith on the show, the great actor. And director, Kevin
cool,
Smith.
man. That's great.
And the first thing I asked him, I had to get into his conversation with his work with George Carlin on Dogma. And he unpacked it. I'm not going to waste our time talking about it. But for me, that was a very full circle moment on how he influenced him and his comedy. So was there was that the plan early on? Did you always want to get into comedy, or was that something that you always kind of had in the blood and it was parked until later on in life?
I think it was in the blood. I think it was, I remember listening to Dennis Miller albums, records, tapes, whatever they were in the early 90s and thinking, this is magic. This is alchemy. And thinking like, but this isn't a real thing. Real people don't do this. And I felt I did plays in high school. And I remember being on stage and thinking, this is the most fun I've ever had, but I can't do this. I need to go to college and get a job and be responsible and make money, because that's what responsible people who are raised by Depression era parents, that's how they think.
Right.
And so I went to business school to get a better job and to make more money. And then I told jokes at a talent show I just made fun of my friends for 10 minutes during this talent show. And this theater that was not an empty seat in a 300 seat theater was in tears laughing. And I was like,
wow.
oh my God, that's the
greatest. It on your first.
I murdered.
Wow.
Well, look, killing in front of your friends is, if you can't kill in front of your friends, don't try to kill in front of strangers.
No.
Okay.
Because if they're not going to laugh at you and give you sympathy laughs, it's not going to happen.
So this was just such a natural, it was like a narcotic experience, and it was organic because I was just up there being me. And that's the quest any comedian strives to attain. Bill Burr says, you get into comedy because you're the funny guy among your friends at the bar, and then it takes you 10 years to figure out how to be that guy on stage. And it really is true that it takes you 8 or 10 years to start to just relax and be natural on stage.
Is Bill Burr a better comedian or actor at this point? I would argue that he is a fantastic actor.
There are very few people who are as good at anything as Bill Burr is at comedy. So to say he's a better actor than he is a comedian, I wouldn't go there. But
wanted to poke
I'm
a
not
hot
gonna.
take there.
I love that he's pushing the limits and that he's like, no, I want to do more than just comedy.
Yeah, he's fantastic. So I want to get back to the career trajectory here. We're talking the early days of tech. What drew you to the tech world?
I needed a job. That's
simple as that. We're in
so
early
I
2000s,
graduated,
right?
and I came out of
late
business
90s,
school.
sorry.
I came out of business school in '97, and I borrowed $80,000 for tuition, and that would be $150,000-$160,000 in today's dollars,
which is 1 year of college.
Right.
Pretty much.
So I was like, I got job offers to be in consulting and Coopers and Lybrand Consulting, and I was like, and that was not the top firm. It was not McKinsey, but it was a good job. And it was like over 6 figures. And I was like, I just can't commit to doing something that I'm not excited about. And so in April of my second year, I declined my offers and I started my job search all over again. And I wanted to be in TV or film because I thought someday they're going to discover me in a marketing meeting. But nobody really wanted to talk to me in TV or film because I had no experience. And so I was like, well, this internet thing is new. And one day a job offer came to the Career Center. Now remember 1997, they had these binders full of job descriptions, job openings, because there was no, Indeed.com back then.
There was no LinkedIn. There was no Zip. There was none of that.
Yeah. Yep. So there were these analog job databases. And so I found one, and it was for the head of advertising sales for a ad-supported CD-ROM product that was like a magazine. So you got a CD-ROM with content on it, and there were ads on this CD-ROM.
We are so old, man.
I know, dude.
I'm not much younger than you, and I look back on this tech, and I'm like, oh my god, it was like the mainframe computers taking up the whole room with ROMs. I remember burning CDs. Like, geez.
Well, that was what it was, and it was called Launch. It was the Launch CD-ROM, and they'd film interviews with 311 and Matchbox 20 and Sheryl Crow. And I sold ads for Dentine gum and, Menon Speed Stick and stuff like that.
Fun.
And that was my first job out of business school. They quickly became a website and had a Pandora-like product offering, but it was before broadband existed and long before smartphones existed. So, it was really difficult to build an audience. We eventually went public and crashed like everybody else in 2000. And then Yahoo scooped us up at the bottom of the dot-com barrel for very little money. But I got to be a part of Yahoo. And that was a really, really great experience.
Back when Yahoo was cool.
Well, when Yahoo came out and they went public in I think 95 or 97, and they had this huge run. It was built on, hot air. But then when that all exploded, they stripped it away and they said, hey, there's still a business here. And then there was this Yahoo V2 version when Terry Semel came in and ran the company. Dan Rosenzweig was the COO. And they really built a solid advertising business based on a real audience as opposed to inflated numbers, the eyeballs and the puff that the early internet had. And so it was great to be a part of that. And the good part of it was that the stock options that we had gotten when they picked us up, they appreciated significantly, and I paid off my student loans. I put some money in the bank, and then I went to LA and did comedy for 2 years.
So let's pause there for a little bit. I want to talk about the corporate world. What was one of those first moments when you got the first corporate punch in the face?
Well, that when the Launch business started to unravel from 97 to late 99 was pretty good. It was hard, but it was, there was a lot of money in the market. People were interested in trying new technology. It was the wild days. But I remember looking at my sales pipeline somewhere in early 2000 or late 99 and just seeing tumbleweeds, like looking 2 and 3 quarters down, down the calendar and going like, holy
Nothing's
shit,
happening.
man, I got nothing. I got nothing.
I know that.
So
feeling.
All the money dried up in the all the venture money dried up. marketing budgets dried up. CMOs who were like buying online ads, they're like not doing that anymore. And then the company started to unravel. We laid off a bunch of great people. And I remember not having survivor's guilt so much, but for some reason at that age, I felt like if I had just worked harder, I could have somehow prevented this global collapse, this global economic collapse.
So you had
I
the
felt like it was
weight of the
my
world
fault.
on your shoulders. Nah. So after Yahoo, was it the move immediate to Facebook?
No, I went to LA and did comedy for 2 years.
So what was that decision? Was it an easy one because you said, you know what, things aren't
It
really
was
working out here. Let me just move out there.
No. Well, I knew that, I had always said to myself, if I have money and I am still single, I'm going to do stand-up comedy full time. And I think on a lot of levels, that's why I stayed single as long as I did, was because I wanted to preserve my career optionality, my
Right, that's a good
stupid chase
excuse.
your dream optionality.
What did your parents think about that move? Were they
My
supportive?
parents, the moves that I've made that were probably the best and most authentic were the moves that my parents just simply didn't understand. And my parents were always supportive, but they would just say, I think they knew that from an early age, I had a very strong work ethic and I was too lazy to be poor. Right. So I wasn't going to suffer. I wasn't going to let myself really suffer.
Too lazy. Let's pause on that. I'm too lazy to be poor. It's
I
almost
didn't have the
counterintuitive.
strength to be poor.
It's hard to. I'm not even gonna say. I have to be careful what I say here. Like, it takes strength. Let's dig into. It takes strength to be poor.
It takes, if you want to be a stand-up comedian and you want to, or any artist, it takes a tremendous amount of strength and self-denial and long-term thinking to sit there and say, I'm going to stick with this craft while my friends are in marketing or investment banking, making $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 a year. I'm going to keep waiting tables and, go to open mics and, record, have anybody listen to me wherever they'll listen to me until I'm good enough to get paid for my craft. And that takes 8 to 10 years, depending upon what craft you're in and how good you are.
It's very few overnight
and that's
successes.
and nothing still might not happen. And so that takes strength. That takes self-discipline. And I didn't have that same kind of self-discipline. So my parents never worried about me from he's not going to be able to eat or pay his rent type, perspective.
Where did that strong talked about that self-belief, that faith in yourself? Was it your faith in? Was it the faith in your ability? What was it? Was it confidence? Was it ego? What was it back then?
Well, for me, it was always like, there's this thing inside of me, and I don't know exactly what it is. Look, there's this thing in all of us. We all have a thing inside of us that we're trying to learn how to express. And some of us have a little closer attachment to that thing than others. Look, I've been doing this for, off and on for 20 years. And I still don't have a name for it. And I still don't know exactly how it best manifests. But the only way you figure that out is by, writing every day, performing as often as you can, and trying to find the articulation of that spark inside of you. I might not ever find it exactly, or it might not ever light a fire on a scale basis, on a basis of the scale of which is interesting. I might not ever go viral on the social media platforms because I haven't figured a way to articulate it on the canvas that is Instagram or TikTok. But you have to, the reason you pursue this, anybody pursues whether it's cooking or music or comedy or drama, is that because you feel like you have this thing that has to be expressed or you won't be expressing your true humanity.
Dude, you just hit the nail on the head. And for me, I think that big moment was, and it sounds so fucking cliche, like it should be on a poster, Paul, but embracing the journey, like really embracing the journey and the ride and being part of it, and not always looking for that goalpost. And, the goalpost keeps moving, but enjoying the journey of it and building on your skill set and building in your accomplishments and accolades and not comparing it. It's hard to not compare yourself. Like, how do you go out there and do stand up and look at these other people that that you're a better comedian, but for some reason that person got that break. Like,
what?
That person
no,
is
I've
not
never
fucking
thought that.
that person is the least funny motherfucker, or the same thing in social media. Or how about me, dude? And you're a podcaster too. I mean, we both have a decent amount of success in podcasting, relatively speaking. But for me, man, I look at some of these shows. Look at the Hawk Tua girl. I'm like, what the fuck? That Hawk Tour girl getting her 15 minutes of fame, and now she's got a top podcast. I mean,
For
yeah,
how long? For how
right.
long? She will
She's
either
actually
do
somewhat
that.
entertaining, though. I'll give her that for a second.
Yeah,
But she
and
actually had a little bit of
she's
skill.
probably been this, hilarious person to hang out with for all her life, and then she just happened to get discovered in one moment.
But she's also with Whitney Cummings on that show, who's funny as hell. So there's a little bit of that. But like, I look at these people and I'm like, geez, like, why is that not me? I should be up there. I'm talented. I got skill.
I've really tried in the last year to worry about me and nobody else, because look, one club that doesn't book you, one social media platform whose algorithm ignores you, one video platform where your clips don't go viral. Like, you're not in control of all that.
No.
The only thing you're in control of is how you spend your time and your attitude. That's it.
Absolutely.
And so I can sit there and look at the thousands of other people who are more successful than I am in comedy and resent them, or I can put my energy into how am I going to find my lane? How am I going to find how to express who I want to be? And if I do that, I'll be successful. And if I don't, I won't be.
Well said. So let's go back to that first stint at comedy. How long did it last, and when did you realize that you might have to go back to a 9 to 5?
Well, I happened to meet one of the senior people at the Improv chain of comedy clubs, and he gave me the opportunity to host at the Brea and Irvine Improvs full time. And it was a great opportunity. It was 10 times better than I even understood how great it was. And so I got tons of stage time. And I was awful when I started. I had maybe been on stage 30 times. I was an open micer, and all of a sudden I'm opening for Daniel Tosh. And
that guy was funny.
Dude, that guy is one of the best. He is phenomenal.
Tosh was what was the name of that show?
Tosh.0. Yeah, no, Tosh is a hardened warrior, and he is naturally very, very gifted. But I'm opening for this guy, and I don't know what I'm doing. And anyway, but I got better fast. I didn't get great, but I got better fast. I got competent in a hurry. But what happened was, you don't want to get seen until you're good. I was getting seen in LA by senior talent, and I wasn't ready for it.
Interesting point.
And the things weren't really going as fast as I thought they would. And then I got engaged to my wife and mother of my children. And I was like, I don't want to be a journeyman comic and try to raise a family and try to pay for a family. And so about that time, I started thinking about getting another job. And a friend of mine from Yahoo called and said, hey, I'm working for this social media company and I need a salesperson in LA. Why don't you join? And that's how I became the 250th employee at Facebook.
Hey, everybody. I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love, and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial, and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
I want to talk about the early days there. Did you have engagement with Zuck back then?
I met Zuck on a half dozen occasions, but I don't think he knows who I am.
Any initial impressions of early Zuck? Did you see something in his eye, and did you see something?
No.
Right time, right place.
I mean, it's in retrospect, I was even thinking about this yesterday. How would I have behaved differently back then if I had known what I know now?
Not at all.
No, I would have behaved very differently.
How
so?
I
mean, I would have had a little altar of Zuck on my desk. No. So I remember Zuck talking about, like, as a salesperson, your incentives are structured to think every 90 days. Right. So I'm comparing myself against Yahoo and MySpace. And, we were much smaller than those platforms when I started. In fact, when I told my wife, she was like, do you think my Facebook will turn into anything? And I was like, someday it could be as big as MySpace. That's how big I dreamt. Okay. That's like the silliest low expectations comparison ever. And so, but you're sitting there going, like, your clients are comparing you to Yahoo and MySpace.
Yeah.
And so that's how you're trained to think. Zuck, in the meantime, is saying, we're building an app to connect humankind. And I was like, okay, whatever.
He was all the way over here.
Yeah. Right. No, he's thinking, 20 years in the future. And salespeople are like, okay, but how you're telling me to hit my numbers this quarter.
Yeah. How am I going to sell that?
Right. And so you can't sit there and go like, oh, in 2018, we're going to have great ad products. Well, what are you going to do for me this quarter? So there was that tension. But it was clear we were doing something special because the audience was growing so incredibly fast. So you could get any meeting you wanted. Every advertiser, every marketer, many CMOs wanted to meet with us just to get the story.
Very rare just to be in that position of demand inbound for sales.
Well, interest inbound.
Interest.
Demand
Wasn't always
in
converting.
terms of advertising dollars, much harder to generate than the interest was. And so that was the conflict as a salesperson who's measured and compensated based on revenue. And so it was it's a constant, battle between expectations and reality.
Fascinating. So you put your time in there. When did you know the clock was up?
When they asked me to move up to Menlo Park. I was in LA and since business school at that time, I'd moved to New York, to LA, to San Francisco, to New York, and back to LA. And so in 2010, they said, we'd like you to be at headquarters, which was a good thing, which was hey, we believe in you. We want you to be a part of this, management and all this kind of stuff. It was and I was running the West Coast sales team. And so that was a very positive thing, but I was so exhausted from all my moving around. I had I had one small child and my wife was on bed rest with our second child. And I was very stressed out. And my parents were back in Atlanta and they were sick. And I was like, if I'm moving anywhere, I'm going home. And so I moved back to Atlanta, and shortly thereafter I left the company.
What happened when you moved back home and you left Facebook? What was the thought process on what was next? Was it continuing in the corporate world? Well, where was your mind at that point? You had a kid, another one on the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, by the time we got back to Atlanta, we had two very small children. And so my thought was, let me just not work for a little bit. Let me just sort of, step away from this and I'll figure it out. And meaning will find me. My next journey will find me. But I really didn't put a lot. I sum it up by saying I walked away from Facebook. I didn't walk toward anything. And that's one of the lessons that I would encourage your listeners to think about. If you're leaving something, what are you going toward? Because you should always have a destination in mind as opposed to just not that kind of thing. And so, and for that reason, I didn't do stand-up. I didn't run back to stand-up, even though I knew in my heart that it was my real dream. I didn't go back to stand-up in Atlanta because I didn't know where to start in Atlanta. I was afraid of failing again. There's a lot of like, well, what will the people who I used to work with think about me? All these kinds of silly noise in your head that keeps you from doing the things that you really should be doing. And so for like a year and a half, almost 2 years, I didn't do anything. I kind of just worked out, spent time with my kids, played golf, read a lot of books, did a little speaking. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I was like, okay, I'm going to do some stand up. And so I started going to open mics again, and I went to a couple, did okay. Then I went to one and I bombed so hard that on the way home, I was like, I got to get a job. I got to go back and do something that's not easy, but easy to understand. And so I took a job. I eventually got a job with a small software company. That didn't go well. And so after 3 years after I left Facebook, a year at that job, I was like, okay, look, I want to be a stand-up comedian. I want to be a creative person who writes and does comedy. And that's when I started. I started writing every day and I started going to open mics again, and I haven't stopped for 10 years.
If you don't mind me asking, this pays the bills?
No, Facebook stock pays the bills.
So you're still riding that one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And
I won the lottery, dude. And if I'm not look, I could have spent.
But you had that safety net. You had that safety net that enabled you to follow your passion. Most people don't.
This is true. Right. And at a certain point, I was like, look, if I've been given this gift, no, and that's why I was like, if I've been given this gift and I'm not doing it to chase what I know to be my truest desire, then it's a dereliction of opportunity.
I fucking love that.
Thank you.
And I say that I love that because I say all the time, people ask me, hey, are you podcasting all the time? I see you out there, you're doing this, you're still recruiting. And I'm like, well, this pays the bills right now. And someone asked me like, well, if podcasting replaced that, I would drop recruiting in 2 seconds. Yes, I enjoy it and I love it, but this is what I love to do. And I dream about that, Paul. I dream about if I had the financial stability of what I could do with the show, how much bigger I could take it, where I would take it, the creativity I would expand upon.
Yeah.
And you're lucky.
Well,
You earned it.
what's interesting is what I love in podcasting is a lot of fun because it opens doors you never imagined would be open. Like, and I've gotten to meet people through my little podcast.
Yeah.
And we all know the numbers are my podcast reaches thousands of people, not tens of thousands,
Same
not
here.
hundreds. I mean, and so, but it's like having a small radio show, and it's got a real audience, but it's not huge. But I'll call people or reach out to them on email, and it's amazing who will say yes.
Isn't that amazing? People ask me all the time, they're like, how did you get X, Y, and Z in your show? I look at your list and looking like people I love, Moby and LL Cool J. Like
Moby's publicist contacted me. And it's like, yeah, I'll talk to Moby.
Yeah, Moby's like, grew up with Moby. It's Moby. It's fucking Moby.
So, I mean, LL Cool J was a friend of mine, close friend who worked with him, and, he got it. And the Nobel Prize winner is a guy named Sir Angus Deaton, who's an economics professor at Princeton. And while I was on campus interviewing him, I reached out to another professor there named Peter Singer, who's this controversial philosopher who the New Yorker called the world's most influential living philosopher. And I reached out to him. And he agreed to give me an hour of his time. And so I sat down in his office. I'm sitting there talking to Peter Singer because I have a podcast.
Did you ask the Nobel Prize winner where he keeps his Nobel Prize?
I didn't ask him that.
Like, where the fuck do you keep it? Like, where is it? Like, if I had, it would be right here. It would be
Hell
right.
Yeah, it would be.
My office here.
What he said was interesting. I said, "What's it feel like to have a Nobel?" He goes, "You know what?" He goes, "It makes other people happy." He goes, "When
it would make me happy." I'm sorry.
No, but I think this was an interesting observation
Because
when he got the prize, and this is what the podcast is all about. You get this thing. And in my case, it was money. And I was like, I always wanted to have a lot of money. And then I worked at Facebook and I made a lot of money. And I was like, oh shit, I have a lot of money now.
Yeah,
how's it feel? Well, it's good. But when you look in the mirror, you still see, your nose hairs, like
you're still a person.
And you still feel all the childhood anxieties. And you're like, why didn't I kiss that girl in 10th grade? I'm a fucking loser. Like all these same things. And I asked him and he goes, the Nobel Prize makes other people happy. Like the night after he won it, he was in a taxi and the guy asked what I do. He goes, well, I just won the Nobel Prize. He's like, the taxi driver lost his mind. And that taxi driver went home and was like, I took a Nobel Prize winner. Look, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you about having gotten the opportunity to meet a Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah, neither of us are that person and we're still talking about it.
Well, but he was just a gracious, smart, good-humored guy that was fun to talk to.
I found, and I'm curious, in my line of work with podcasting, the most successful people are the most open and generous with their time. Have you found that to some extent?
Yes. Maybe
it's my experience.
There's a certain confidence I think that some people have that where, they're not trying, they don't have anything to prove anymore. But there's a lot of people you meet, dude, that are still like, they've gotten all these accolades and they're still trying to prove something to themselves and to the world. And you can see kind of like who's in that camp and who's not. And it's really interesting. And you go, man, I wish I could give you the serenity that you think the next level of accomplishment would give you. But if 100 million doesn't do it, then 200 million is not going to do it.
Let me ask you a question as a fellow podcast host. What have you learned about yourself over the years of doing this art that we call speaking into a microphone and hopefully people listen?
Well, a lot. I guess a lot. I mean, I'm very curious. I just enjoy these conversations. I enjoy human connection. I've learned a lot about, and we're taking the podcast, by the way, the new podcast. When is this going to air? Do you know?
Probably in about 4 weeks.
Okay. So by the time this airs,
probably around Thanksgiving, before Thanksgiving, around Thanksgiving, maybe it's a little longer than 4 weeks.
The new name of the podcast is going to be Reasonably Happy.
So we're moving away from crazy money.
Yeah. Because crazy money, this whole thing was all about, okay, you think the thing you want is going to make you happy and then you get it. But crazy money doesn't say that. Crazy money says, how do you make money in real estate while you sleep? And that's why I get these pitches for these awful potential guests that are, like selling you some scam.
Delete.
Totally.
That's what I do.
And so, and I think, I got a warm introduction to Ed Begley Jr.'s publicist.
Huh.
And I was like, oh, great, let's schedule Ed. And then his publicist, who was a very cool guy, he was like, why would Ed do this? Crazy money? That's not what this is all about. That's not on brand for Ed. And I told him, I was like, no, it's about fulfillment and, enjoying life and trying to understand what's going to make us happy. And he's like, well, then why didn't you call it something else? And I was like, he's totally right. And so we're going to rename the podcast to Reasonably Happy, which is all about, hey, you know what? Set your expectations in life appropriately. Enjoy what you have.
Mhm.
Don't expect things to be perfect, and be okay with that. Like embrace the imperfection. And one of the things it's a long way of answering your question, what have I learned? I think that being spontaneous and trying to have conversations lends itself to much better engagement than just a straight interview, which is, you wrote a book about, I
Tell
see
me
you wrote a
about the
book
book.
about making money. Tell me your
Nope.
ABC system for
Ugh.
getting out of debt.
I
Like,
can't
that's
do that.
boring.
I
That's
can't.
boring.
My body won't let me do that. But I will go back to one quick thing, and something
Yeah.
that it's a quote that I try to really truly believe in, that expectations are the blueprint for disappointments, and that's something that really has resonated with me in the last couple of years.
Yeah, why
I
is that?
I try to manifest, Paul. I try to manifest. We all have shit going on in our life. We all have disappointments, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's more of an overexcitement about something or over anticipation
Yeah.
and it's a fine line between setting your dreams, because I'm a big dreamer and I'm a big believer, and I'm a big believer in manifesting. But lately, I'm really just trying to manage those expectations so I'm not disappointed.
I think that's
It's a
we
tough one.
talked about having like reasonable expectations as a title, and my wife, sometimes, having spent almost 15 years or about that in sales, you learn that you can have a deal that looks like it's done, and then it falls through at the last minute,
For
and
a
you're
reason
like,
you can never even think about.
right. Like, yeah, like the company gets bought. I remember I think Procter, I almost had a Pringles deal done like in 2001 or something. And then Procter and Gamble bought Pringles. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Where'd
So
that come
where did
from?
it come from? And so I'm the same way with comedy. Like,
Mm.
I've got a show coming up in the New York Comedy Festival,
Yeah,
and
we'll get to that.
it was almost done for a long time. And my wife was like, are you excited? I'm like, I'll be excited when it's on the calendar,
Once it's booked.
when it's booked,
I say
when
it all
it's
the time,
live.
when I see it booked or when I see the money in the account. When I close
Right.
a deal in recruiting, that's when
Yeah.
I get excited.
Yeah, when the check clears, it's not
It's
even when the deal's signed, it's when they pay the
and that's
bill.
it. But that's about managing expectations. It's so funny too. I talk about, whenever I talk on a recruiting podcast about recruiting, I always share this one story. It was like a creative director role, and the fee was like 30 grand. And the
Yep.
candidate accepted, and she was supposed to start on a Monday. And Sunday night, I get a text from her. She's like, "Hey, Adam, I got great news. Call me." And I go, "What the fuck?" Whenever I
Oh,
see that
no.
the Sunday night text in recruiting is like the kiss
Oh,
of death.
no.
And I'm just like, what could it be? She's like, "Oh my God, I got engaged over the weekend, and my husband works for Microsoft. My fiance works for Microsoft, and we're moving out to Seattle, and now I can't take this role."
Oh, my
I'm like, what an
God.
asshole. Like, why? I'm not happy for you. Are you
Right.
kidding me?
But see,
That's 30 grand.
having those expectations, it doesn't make you a pessimist. That's what I
No,
try to explain to
realist.
her. It's like, look, and it actually, it prepares you better for whatever happens on the other side. So you're not as crushed when
No.
things inevitably don't work out, or when and you don't, you sort of just have a more moderate, stabilized sense of ups and downs. And I prefer that.
Let's talk about New York Comedy Festival. When is
Yeah.
that? Is it coming out?
November 8th, Friday, November 8th at Rodney's.
Rodney's.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I am too. November 8th. I'm going to put it on the calendar. We're going to see if we can make it. It's in the city, Rodney's, right? Where's that?
Rodney's on First Ave. Yeah.
Yeah. It's First and what? Is it downtown?
It is First and 60th ish.
All right. So
something
it's on the
like
east.
that.
So it's on the,
Yeah. It's on the Upper East, or it's Midtown East Side.
The New York Comedy Festival is pretty cool. It's a broad spectrum too. It's everything from the headliners at the Garden to every small club.
Yeah, and this is their 20th year. They've got a crazy lineup. I'm honored to be a part of it. I don't expect it to make me famous, but it's cool to just say that I've worked hard enough to put myself in that broad spectrum of comics.
To close the book on comedy here before we wrap it up, what advice would you give to any aspiring comedian out there? Someone who thinks they're funny, someone who wants to
become
give it
a
shot.
creative director is what I was. It's funny. Look, you have to want this, and it has to be, and I think maybe, you just have to be hungry. You have to be irrationally hungry to do this. And and you have to embrace the idea that the journey itself is worth it, that the struggle is worth it. Because as I joke, there's no promise. I don't joke. This is absolutely real, but there's no promise that you will be famous. And if you do achieve fame, that fame will last for a certain period of time, and then it will most likely go away. Or you'll get a great gig, and then that gig goes away. And so the ups and downs are brutal. And so you have to decide if the effort, if I say trying is your trophy, and the only thing you get is the answer to the question, what would happen if I gave it my all? That's it. That's all you get.
Love it.
And so you won't have the deathbed, regret that you didn't give it your all, but all you get is the answer to that question.
What's keeping you up at night these days?
Nothing. I love how I spend my days. I mean, yes, there's the broad question about the political leadership of our country.
I'm talking about you, right?
Its role in the broader world, all that kind of stuff.
That's out of our control,
persistent of religious fundamentalism, all those things.
But that's out of our control. That's out of our day-to-day
totally out
control.
of our control.
Focus on now, the present, the kids, what's close to you, your heart.
I mean, I'm very, very fortunate that, knock on wood, my family is healthy. We have enough to eat, and I go to bed. More importantly, I wake up every morning excited about what I get to do.
Lucky.
And that's a huge, huge blessing.
What has been that golden piece of advice that you have received that you take action on every day, every morning?
Oh gosh. Why did I should have that ready to go. I keep
closer
coming
material,
back.
Man. Closer material.
There's this Simon Sinek quote that I kind of keep coming back to. And he says that charisma comes from a clarity of why. If you know why you're doing something, people will find themselves drawn to you. And if you can do anything, you have to decide for yourself, pick something worth doing, do it for the right reasons, and keep doing it. And all these worries about what will other people think go all out the window. Because after a certain point, people go, oh, you're committed to this thing. That's cool. And what's happened for me around podcasting is people go, oh, we really love the message of your podcast. Will you come speak to us? Oh, and by the way, sometimes they pay you a lot of money to do that. Now, I'm not making Facebook money doing this, but I'm more than covering the cost of the podcast. And it's cool because I never expected that that's where this would lead, but it's been a pretty neat outcome of something that was unintended.
Well said. And last but not least, you have achieved levels of success in your own heart, in your own mind, and what others on the outside would deem societal measures of success. But Paul Ollinger, how do you define success?
I think it comes down to what I was referring to earlier. If you wake up in the morning and you feel good about what you get to do that day, then you've created a sense of freedom and self-determination that is independent of your net worth. And I that's a pretty good metric.
I love it. Paul, this has been fun. I mean, I told you at the beginning that we could probably keep going for a little bit.
We could do that.
We could probably keep going. Wait, let's pause that something. Give us one kind of little bit that you're workshopping here.
Well, it's all
a concept. Give me a concept. Bounce it off.
Okay.
Workshop.
I've been taking Ozempic. All right. Do you know about Ozempic? You know, the wonder drug. And so I was up to like 2:30, and my cardiologist was like, "You got to do something about this." And I eventually was like, "Well, look, I'm going to just try Ozempic." Okay. And it works, man. It really, really works because it makes you feel. It slows down the nervous eating that I was doing because you feel full longer, but that you feel full longer because it slows down your digestion. And so like for the first 3 days, you feel constipated. And then on day 4, you find yourself sprinting for the bathroom at the Harlem DMV, like it's, and then, if you want to know who's taking Ozempic, look for the guy on the treadmill at the gym who's got a gut full of half digested food that's sloshing around. And he's trying to keep his burps down. See, no punchlines yet. But the concept is there. That's what this is. Developmental piece.
It's workshop. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me, Paul, and thank you for spending close to 44 minutes. Look at that. I hit that one.
I should have done a better bit. Come to the Rodney's on November 8th at At Rodney's New York Comedy Festival.
Check out the New York Comedy Festival.
Yeah.
Follow Paul on Instagram, Paul_Ollinger. We're going to link it up. Check out his Substack, and you know where to find out more about the show, thepodcast.com. Follow us on all the social media channels. If you like this show, hopefully you did leave a review. Rating, sharing is caring. It goes a long way. Remember, be good to yourself, be better to others, and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search The Podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.